Welcome back, fourth graders. Yesterday we left off at a pretty exciting part of the story. Judy had reached the Golden City and just yelled Jumanji. And then we took some time to work on an assignment that involved sequence of events. Now, we always come back to things we've had in our readers' notebooks before, and we do this throughout the year, and year after year after year, you'll see these things. We had a page, if you remember, on sequence earlier this year, and it said that sequence is the order of events or things that happen and follow each other. And sometimes there is actual clue words like first and then next and so on and so on. This particular story didn't give us any clue words. It was just page after page, and it was fairly challenging. Maybe you went back and rewatched that video because you weren't sure exactly which one happened first, second, third. Maybe you took some notes and you put like little notes on the side. First was monkeys, and then after the monkeys it was lions, and it was the snake, or whatever you tried to do to help you with this. But let's go through it real quick. The first event, the first thing that happened. If you remember in our story, number one goes with the lion. The lion was lying on that piano. That's where it started. The first event of all these crazy things that happened. And if you remember, Peter was pretty bored at first. He was like, oh, so what? Who cares? Big deal. There's a lion. He didn't realize that the game actually came to life. So once that happened, everything changed. But yes, there was a lion lying on the piano. The second thing that happened was those monkeys. The monkeys were stealing food in the kitchen. Judy heard those pots and pans clanging around. Then the third thing that happened was there was a rainstorm. It was called a monsoon. It's like a heavy, heavy rainstorm. It began to fall. Thunder and lightning crackling throughout the house. Then the fourth thing was this guide. It's called a jungle guide. It was a person that was in there with them. Usually a jungle guide helps you get out of a jungle, but in this case, they were lost looking at their map. Number 5 was the tsetse fly. Interesting if you wanted to look that up. What is a tsetse fly? But a tsetse fly carries sleeping sickness, and so Peter fell asleep because of that. Number 6, we had the rhinoceroses stampeding through the living room, breaking all that furniture. Number 7, the thing that freaked me out the most was this giant python snake slithering across the fireplace. And then Peter rolled, and there was a volcano that started to erupt, and the steam, that's that steam we're seeing rising up in the room here. The steam filled that room. And finally, Judy, thank goodness, rolled a 12. After she shook or rolled a 12 on the dice, she yelled Jumanji. So that's where we left off yesterday. Just at that point where she yelled Jumanji. Anyway, now that you check this over, I know it's pretty challenging, so don't feel bad if you messed up a little bit on this. But we're going to go back and listen to more of the story to finish. And, of course, we got to check in with Honey Rose. The poor thing is down there and really wants to play this board game with us, Dogopoly. So let's go back down and take a few turns with her before we finish up the story. Okay, Honey Rose, the kids and I shook a 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, we landed on good dog. Let's see what the card says for that one. Good dog. You brought home a puppy from the pound. Every player gives you $20. Oh, Honey Rose, I brought home a puppy from the pound. You have to give me $20. Thank you, Honey Rose. All right, it's your turn. All right, you shook a 6, Honey Rose. We got to move your dog dish. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, that was close. You almost landed in the kennel, Honey Rose. You're just sniffing, it says. All right. The kids and I will roll our next turn here. We got a 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, Sparky. You know what? This one is still, I think, available. Sparky. You know what, kids? We'll figure out if we want to buy Sparky. It costs $250. But in the meantime, let's go back and take a look at our story, Jumanji.
She dropped the dice from her hand. 1 6, then another. Judy grabbed her piece and slammed it to the board. Jumanji! She yelled as loud as she could. The steam in the room became thicker and thicker. Judy could not even see Peter across the table. Then, as if all the doors and windows had been opened, a cool breeze cleared the steam from the room. Everything was just as it had been before the game. No monkeys, no guide, no water, no broken furniture, no snake, no lion roaring upstairs, no rhinos. Without saying a word to each other, Peter and Judy threw the game into its box. They bolted out the door, ran across the street to the park, and dropped the game under a tree. Back home, they quickly put all their toys away, but both children were too excited to sit quietly, so Peter took out a picture puzzle. As they fit the pieces together, their excitement slowly turned to relief, and then exhaustion. With the puzzle half done, Peter and Judy fell sound asleep on the sofa. "Wake up, dears," Mother's voice called. Judy opened her eyes. Mother and Father had returned and their guests were arriving. Judy gave Peter a nudge to wake him. Yawning and stretching, they got to their feet. Mother introduced them to some of the guests, then asked, "Did you have an exciting afternoon?" "Oh, yes," said Peter. "We had a flood, a stampede, a volcano. I got sleeping sickness and—" Peter was interrupted by the adults' laughter. "Well," said Mother, "I think you both got sleeping sickness. Why don't you go upstairs and put your pajamas on? Then you can finish your puzzle and have some dinner." When Peter and Judy came back downstairs, they found that Father had moved the puzzle into the den. While the children were working on it, one of the guests, Mrs. Budwing, brought them a tray of food. "Such a hard puzzle," she said to the children. "Daniel and Walter are always starting puzzles and never finishing them." Daniel and Walter were Mrs. Budwing's sons. They never read instructions either. "Oh, well," said Mrs. Budwing, turning to rejoin the guests. "I guess they'll learn." Both children answered, "I hope so." But they weren't looking at Mrs. Budwing. They were looking out the window. 2 boys were running through the park. It was Danny and Walter Budwing, and Danny had a long, thin box under his arm.
So the story leaves us with kind of a cliffhanger, this unfinished unknown, and has us guessing what we think might happen to these boys. Peter and Judy were just so relieved to finally get that game over with and put it back in the box and put the box back in the park that they were just laying around sleeping from exhaustion. And as they looked out the window, they noticed there was these 2 kids, these 2 children that were running out of the park, and one of them had this box underneath their arm. So we can infer that that box must be the game Jumanji, because remember, Peter and Judy just hid that same box in the park just a little bit ago. We also can infer about these 2 boys because their mother was at the party that Judy and Peter's parents were hosting after the opera. And the mother told Peter and Judy a little bit about her two boys, Danny and Walter Budway. And we can use that now to make an inference. So looking back, remember an inference. This is, again, another page from our reader's notebooks that we come back to. An inference is using clues provided by the author to figure some things out. We're going to figure out a few things about these two boys, Danny and Walter. And how do we figure them out? Well, we use background knowledge of what we know and put it together with what we read and what we see in the text. And that gives us our inference. So using this information about our background knowledge and what we read and what we see, I'm going to go back to that packet that we had actually on inferring. And maybe you used some of this with your teacher already. I'm just going to show it. You don't need to copy this down for yourself. But I'm going to use this to help us make our final inference at the end of this story. It's from Jumanji, of course, with Chris Van Allsburg as our author. Here's those three parts. What the text says, what I know already, my prior knowledge, and then my inference, what I came up with. Well, here's what the text told us, the clues. The text said that you must read the instructions carefully for the game Jumanji. And once you start the game, you must finish by reaching the golden city and yelling, Jumanji, just like Judy did. Now, what I know before this, my prior knowledge, is that people who don't read instructions carefully usually don't know what to do. They make mistakes because, well, they don't follow the directions. That's what I know about people who don't read instructions very carefully. That's my experience. That's my prior knowledge, what I understand. That doesn't come from the story. That just comes from my experience. Now, there's one final thing from the actual story that helps us make our inference, and that's what Danny and Walter's mom said. She said that Danny and Walter don't finish puzzles or read instructions. That came right from the story. So based on what I read and what I know, what do I think is going to happen to these two boys, Danny and Walter Budway? These two kids that are now happily leaving the park with a game underneath their arm, excited to probably see what it's all about, but not probably going to read the directions very carefully or read the instructions. Well, let's go back and check in with Honey Rose with that board game Dogopoly and see how that's going before we come back and finish up with our assignment for today. You know what, Honey Rose? You're doing okay, actually. You bought some properties. We have some properties. We went ahead and bought Sparky, that property last time that was $250. I decided actually for the whole online group of kids that we're going to buy this one because that's a good one with some rent on it. But you have some properties too, Honey Rose, that are actually not too bad. I think you're doing okay. I mean, look, Honey Rose, you have your own dog card. I think you're doing pretty well in this game when you have your own dog card, Golden Retriever. It says with a big bone. Oh my gosh, if you put houses or dog houses on it, that's a lot of money when somebody lands on that square. And if you have a big bone on it, that's $1,050 for somebody that lands on it. You know what's fun about this game too is on the back it has some facts about these different dogs. And here's the fact about you. It says Golden Retriever. In the U.S., the Golden is second only to the Lab in terms of popularity based on AKC registrations. The breed originated in Britain in the 1800s and was developed to retrieve shot waterfowl. The Golden, let me finish reading it, babes. The Golden is one of the top obedience competition dogs in the U.S. You're supposed to be really obedient. Are you being obedient? It says the Golden is one of the top obedience competition dogs. Your mortgage value, though, it's only $110. Sorry to tell you that. All right, fourth graders, well, go, if you would, to the Canvas assignment. There's only 3 questions that go along with our story today. And as you read these 3 questions, think about the character traits to answer the questions below and also use some inference. There's one of them, the last one here about Danny and Walter, that you're going to have to use some inference like we talked about. All right, good luck. We will see you again tomorrow.